Re-Zero, Arc 9, Chapter 32, The Man Named Clind.
While Aldebaran's party was being relentlessly pursued by powerful adversaries, there were two other places in the kingdom where grueling and fierce battles of equal intensity were being fought. One battle was between the Sword Saint, who continuously sought to prevent the destruction of the world, and the Witch of Envy, who persistently sought to swallow up the Augria sand dunes after manifesting a part of herself from the sealed shrine. Both the Witch of Envy and the Sword Saint possessed the power to instantly end any battle if they were facing any other opponent, but exactly because they were facing each other in battle, the fight remained evenly matched, and the outcome continued to be left undecided. The battle would continue for a full 7 days and 7 nights, bringing the grave cost of the world's destruction with it. The other battle, as opposed to Aldebaran's party and the Sword Saints, did not involve physical conflict, yet had the potential to influence the outcome of the other two battles greatly. In other words, it was the struggle of those who were pursuing the following star, with Petra Late as the key. Petra knew very little about the man named Clind. He was on her side. That, there was absolutely no doubt. Arnrose Mylode, his master, was a shrewd little girl who, despite her young age and the unfortunate blemish of being related to Roswell, remained unfazed through and through. She was one of the Emilia camp's strongest supporters and, even from Petra's perspective, was undoubtedly charmed by Emilia. Clind, who dedicated himself to supporting Arnrose and was trusted as a versatile all-purpose butler, had also given Petra lessons in etiquette and manners when she first started working as a maid. Clind had not only educated Petra, but almost everyone associated with the Mathers household. Even Frederica and Ram were taught the fundamentals of being a servant by him. Therefore, Clind could be considered the point of origin for the servants of the Mathers household, and Petra should therefore be regarding him as a teacher or mentor. However, it was none other than the person in question who had corrected Petra's perception. Clind, I never intended to take on such a noble role as teaching and mentoring. Misinterpretation. I am merely conveying what I have heard from my predecessors. It is only because I have remained in this position for many years that I have had many opportunities to do so. Declination. Clind's way of thinking could have been interpreted as a sign of humility and modesty. However, Petra intuitively sensed that these were Clind's true, albeit rarely expressed feelings. In the end, that man undervalues himself. Because he has such low self-esteem, he thinks his work is not worthy of any praise. He is being so condescending. This was Frederica's unusually harsh critique directed solely at Clind. Still, while Petra believed she was absolutely correct and the most wonderful person in the world, she was also in partial disagreement with her. At first glance, Clind's attitude indeed appeared to be that of a person with low self-esteem. However, Clind lacked the apparent hesitation or indecision when communicating with younger people or his junior colleagues, whereas a person with low self-esteem would tend to show more hesitation and indecision. Clind's attitude displayed no such simple and mundane hesitation. Just like Petra, if I put my mind to it, I can do anything. Most people would probably dismiss such a statement as mere arrogance, but Petra did not care about most people, she only cared about those closest to her. And she believed that the people closest to her believed in her confidence and potential. Petra was aware that she was full of potential and had the talent to bring it to fruition. Not only was she cute, but she also possessed the talent necessary to walk her desired path and the determination to believe in that talent and continue striving toward her goals without ever stopping. She was fully aware that she had been blessed with numerous gifts worthy of heaven. As someone who was blessed with such talent, she would say that Clind's attitude was not that of someone with low self-esteem, but rather the opposite. Clind was well aware of his exceptional talents. However, he did not consider them something to be proud of. This made him appear modest and reserved at first glance. Petra, but, I really don't like that. Petra knew very little about the man named Clind. However, Petra honestly did not like Clind, the man she knew so little about. It was not unrelated to the fact that Frederica, who was always so polite and kind to everyone like a loving mother, showed a particularly special attitude and uncharacteristic expressiveness only toward Clind, and that she was able to discern his underlying emotions. Of course, It was also a factor that Clind had been acquainted with Roswell for a very long time and appeared to be on very good terms with him. But the biggest reason derived from Clind's own nature, which differed from his relationships with Frederica and Roswell. The main reason was that the way he conducted himself, which seemed as if he had already given up, was completely contrary to Petra's principles. "Petra, we're back, so lend us a hand. I know you're listening," Clind near Sama. As the dragon carriage passed through the gate at the entrance to Mirila, the town closest to the sand dunes, Petra raised her voice and called out to the familiar man. It was all thanks to Petrash, who had ceaselessly raced fiercely across the sand sea for a day and night from the Pleiades watchtower, that Petra and the others were able to return in the shortest possible time and route. Even so, they were still lagging far behind Al, who had borrowed the wings of the divine dragon. His strength was indispensable to catch up with that increasingly distant target. "Petra," Clind near Sama. Petra pulled on the reins to stop the dragon carriage and raised her voice once more in the town square. Petra's desperate plea was met with silence from the man she had just called out to. But she was convinced that her voice had reached him, and she started glancing around herself. Huh? Where is everyone? As if echoing Petra's gaze, the imaginary Subaru spoke. Just as the imaginary Subaru had said, even though it was midday, there was not a single soul to be seen in the square. No, it was not just the square. There was no sign of life in the entire town. Mirila gave off the impression of a deserted roadside town, but even so, there should have been at least 100 or 200 residents living there. It was very much odd that there was not a single person to be seen anywhere. Maybe Helmet Oji-san wiped everyone out? Subaru, that's a scary thing to say. Don't act like Elsa. Petra, don't say such scary things, Meili-chan. As for you, Subaru, Meili-chan isn't like that anymore. It's just the result of her upbringing. The first half of her remark was for Meili, the second half, for the imaginary Subaru. To say that Meili's worst-case scenario did not briefly cross her mind would have been a lie, but the possibility was able to be ruled out because the town was deserted but not damaged. If Al had wreaked havoc with Volcanica, the town would have been completely wiped off the earth, and irreparable devastation would have ensued. The appearance of the town was not so much a scene of devastation as much as it was. Petra, it looks like they ran away in the night. Subaru, it's like they ran away in the night. Then, the impressions of Petra and the imaginary Subaru unexpectedly overlapped. Since the imaginary Subaru resided within Petra's mind, it was only natural that this would occur. However, as a young woman in love, she was secretly a little bit delighted that her thoughts were mirrored by her beloved. Besides, there were other reasons why she was able to stay positive. Although that may be a slight generalization, that assessment seems to be correct. Perspicacity. With that, a man stepped forward into the now completely deserted town square. Amidst the bleak and desolate townscape, this person maintained a refined aura that stood out. Their mysterious presence was like a single drop of deep blue paint on a blank sheet of paper, exuding a subtle, unobtrusive yet powerful strength. That man had something so innate about himself that would make one believe that even if this were not a deserted roadside town but the bustling royal capital or even a noisy, crowded summer fireworks festival, no one would be able to overlook the man's presence. Subaru, wait a second. I'm now loading Petra's knowledge real quick. Petra, Clind near Sama. Subaru, or, you beat me to it. When the unfamiliar figure appeared, the imaginary Subaru from the past looked a bit disappointed at being beaten to the punch, while Petra quickly jumped down from the driver's seat and looked directly at the newcomer, the versatile butler, and the man who held the key to overturning this situation. Clind. Considering the state of Mirila and the turbulence in the sand sea, it appears that it was the correct decision to abandon the return journey. Fortuitous. Adjusting the position of the monocle on his left eye with his hand, Clind narrowed his eyes at the scene of the empty town and what lied behind Petra and the others, the murky sky that caused all of this. And then, Petra, it appears we need to talk. Urgency. Clind, I understand. Deliberation. Upon hearing a rough explanation, Clind touched his narrow jaw with his finger and closed one eye. The sharp beauty of a man, lost in thought, was in itself as majestic as a painting, but unfortunately, Petra had no time to admire it, as her sensibilities lay elsewhere. If she simply wanted to see a beautiful face, the quickest way would have been to look in a mirror or at Emilia. Clind, what is the condition of Garfield and the one called Ezo? Verification. Meili, I don't think you need to fear for the lives of either Fanged Oniai-san or Sensei-san. Fanged Oniai-san is really 2GH, so I'm worried since he hasn't woken up yet. Uti. Petra, yeah, I think Garf-san was probably protecting Ezo-san. Picking up the second half of Meili's answer, Petra considered the two individuals who had been laid in the dragon carriage. Garfield, whose durability was one of his strengths, had suffered as much damage as Ezo, a dwarf and magician, perhaps because he had shielded Ezo by standing in front of him when they were attacked by the divine dragon. Without those heroic actions, Ezo might not have survived. Subaru, so, Garfield took a direct hit from the dragon, huh? I still can't quite wrap my head around the fact that he's willing to risk his life like that, even though he's only 14 with a major case of chunibyo. Petra, just so you know, Garf-san is 15 now. By the way, I'm turning 14 soon. Subaru, time just flies by. No wonder Petra's gone from being a pretty girl to a beautiful woman. Petra, again, Petra had to keep in mind that this was just the imaginary Subaru in her mind, and not what the real Subaru would say. However, even if it were the real Subaru, he would say something along those lines, and she remembered hearing him say something similar before. Even though she knew it was not flattery, but rather sincere words, the fact that he could say it so casually to anyone other than Emilia was somewhat troubling. Regardless, Petra, while I'm also worried about Garf-san and Sensei-san, my biggest concern is Al-san. Clind near Sama, you waited for us because you feel the same way too, right? Clind, the feeling is not quite the same. The reason I chose to remain in this place was because of a slight sense of unease I felt when I saw Petra and the others off. Misgivings, Petra, a slight sense of unease, Clind, yes. In fact, I informed both Subaru Summer and Beatrice Summer about it. Retrospective, Clind cast his eyes down gloomily upon relaying the information that Petra and Meili had not known. In actuality, since the two who had been informed had both been taken by Al's hand, Clind's self-reproach must have been considerable. Even the imaginary Subaru, who was unfamiliar with Clind, felt a twinge of sympathy for this unfortunate situation. Subaru, well, the more I hear about what happened, the more I think Beatrice and I were in the wrong. I mean, Clind-san communicated everything properly, right? But, we didn't say anything, did we? So, this is the result, it's only natural. Petra, Subaru and Beatrice-chan aren't to blame. Subaru, quiet down. Subaru, my intentions aren't reflected in my written apology. Subaru lamented as if he had struck upon something unreasonable, but Petra would not tolerate any careless disparagement of Subaru, even if it came from Subaru himself. Moreover, Beatrice would also be implicated with that remark. Beatrice was cute and kind, so she could not be at fault. Without hesitation, she would dispense harsh justice that would make anyone tremble upon hearing it. These were the rules of Petra Late's court, and the verdicts of Judge Petra, Meili. So, what was it that was bugging you, Butler Sar-en? Clind, at that time, I was unable to identify it specifically. Inadequacy, however, now that the situation has developed this way. I feel that I have doubts about the establishment of the situation. Concern, prompted by Meili, Clind kept his eyes downcast and put his thoughts into words. The establishment of the situation that Clind found troubling likely referred to when he saw Petra and the others off at Mirila. Clind, it did not seem unnatural. Upon hearing the explanation, the choice of personnel seemed reasonable. However, it also felt like a combination that would require 2 or 3 difficult justifications to make sense. Intentional, Petra, intentional. As Clind gave his explanation, Petra chewed on those words. To be honest, the fact that Clind was vague and avoided making a clear statement about the mistake in the selection of members to travel to the Pleiades watchtower, this fact nagged at Petra's conscience in the form of guilt-ridden speculation. If Emilia, Ram, or Otto had gone with Subaru instead of Petra, things might not have turned out this way. Indeed, if Frederica had been there instead of Petra as initially planned, Al's terrible actions might have been prevented. Meili was irreplaceable in breaking through the Augria sand dunes, and Garfield was the camp's most dependable fighter as an escort. These two were essential members of the expedition. It was only Petra. Petra was the only member who was replaceable. Petra, perhaps she should have been more assertive. Whether it was postponing the trip to the tower or everyone taking action together, of course, it was imperative to report immediately on their return from Wallachia on the events that had transpired there, and it was also true that Schult, who had lost his only support, needed emotional care. Given the necessity of making such sound judgments, there was no doubt that the current members were chosen for the right reasons. However, Petra was not confident that her subjective, arbitrary wishes had not influenced these decisions. Having been separated from Subaru for so long, Petra did not want to be apart from him even for a moment, and she was driven by a selfish desire to be useful to him. In a place where Emilia and Rem were not present, Petra hoped that her strength and presence would be able to support Subaru. As a result, she did not even recognize the uneasiness that Clind had sensed. Subaru, Petra, you're definitely overthinking this. Petra tightly gripped the hem of her skirt, and the intangible hand of imaginary Subaru overlapped hers, gently whispering in her ear. However, Petra was not easily comforted by Subaru's words. Subaru, well, I know it's not my place to say this, but it's not impossible that you had some non-zero amount of ulterior motives, like wanting to be with me. But that's not a bad thing. And even if you did feel that way, it was only a single %. I know that the other 99% was Petra's kindness that I know so well. Petra, no. I'm just making the Subaru in my head say that. Subaru, if you say that, isn't there nothing I can say? That's like playing a banned card. It must have been embarrassing for him to say that he wanted to be with her, but Petra let out a long breath at the sight of imaginary Subaru, blushing slightly as he pleaded with her. To be honest, Petra hated herself for being so easily taken in by his kindness. She thought perhaps she was not a cheap girl, it was just that Subaru's words were too powerful. Subaru, besides, I suspect that your suffering isn't really your fault. Petra, does that have anything to do with Al-san being so strong? Subaru, well, I've never actually seen Al fight with a sword, so I might be talking nonsense. But I do know Reinhard. Even though Al's abilities were unknown, he knew the abilities of Reinhard, the pinnacle of this world. Both Garfield and Ezo were incredibly skilled fighters who were out of Petra's class. Since Al defeated them, assuming that he was even stronger would be natural. However, no matter how strong Al was, he was no match for Reinhard. Subaru, when I first saw him in the loot house, I didn't really have an understanding of the norms of this world, so I was confused. But even by the standards of this world, he's still a monster. Petra, yeah. But Al-san also did something about Reinhard-san. There's no doubt that Flam-chan used her divine protection to summon him, so, Subaru, at the very least, he wasn't instantly killed by Reinhard. Even with an assist character like the Divine Dragon, it's common knowledge that that's not something anyone can do easily, right? Petra, is that related to how we were grouped up? Subaru, maybe. But I really feel like strength alone doesn't explain everything. Petra also carefully considered the implications of what imaginary Subaru had said. Indeed, no amount of strength mattered when facing Reinhard. With strength alone, it would be impossible to overcome Reinhard and achieve one's goal. In other words, besides his strength, there were other reasons for Al's frightening nature. Subaru, honestly, things have been going too well for Al until now. Petra, but people who always seem to be lucky have other reasons besides luck, right? Subaru, right. Although the heart of the matter remained unclear, Petra believed that it was worth remembering that point. By exploring other possibilities, her feelings of guilt with nowhere to go were somewhat alleviated. Perhaps this had been what Subaru really wanted all along. Meili, Petra-chan? Are you okay? You're looking kind of spaced. Oh what? Petra. Sorry, Meili-chan, I'm fine. Anyway, Clind near Sama. Clind, what is it? Confirmation. Petra, I think your sense of unease is correct. Clind near Sama. I'm not exactly sure why, but if we don't understand that unease, no one will be able to stop Alsan, Clind, Petra, it's just us. We're the only ones who can stop Alsan. We have to stop him, then get Subaru and Beatrice-chan back. With her hand placed on her chest, Petra pleaded with Clind, building it up, and then finally exhaling that breath. It had taken considerable courage for Petra to do so. Subaru, imaginary Subaru, stood with his arms crossed and stared at Petra's profile with a complicated expression. Without looking in his direction, Petra remained steadfast in her conclusion. She believed it with all her heart. Petra had read Subaru's Book of the Dead. In the worst-case scenario, Al might have killed Subaru and Beatrice and erased them from the world. It would be natural to think so, given that Natsuki Subaru's Book of the Dead existed. Petra, but, my Subaru isn't normal, the "my" slipped out subconsciously, but it was true. The isn't normal part of it was true. Natsuki Subaru had a power called Return by Death, an incredibly cruel and agonizing power that only a kind person could make use of properly. Petra surmised that the book she had read had been but one of the volumes containing Subaru's experiences of dying up until now. That was because, Petra, after what I saw in that book, did Subaru really manage to survive without dying even once? Subaru, it feels like you have negative trust in me, huh? But, then again, with my impression of what Petra knows. All of the Sin archbishops coming up to bat at once, the adventure at the Pleiades watchtower, and the hell of the Wallachian Empire. For me to overcome all of that without a single mistake is, well, unbelievable even for me, wouldn't you say, Petra? Yeah. When Petra realized that Subaru's glorious achievements, which had already been considered remarkable given the hardships he had overcome, were, in fact, a collection of hellish trials far worse than she could have imagined, she was far from feeling disappointed in Subaru, but rather, she felt heartbroken by that self-sacrifice, and at the same time, she was aware of it. Of the depth of Subaru's psychological scars, caused by Priscilla's death. Subaru was so deeply, deeply hurt, more deeply than anyone could possibly imagine. For precisely that reason, he had taken the blame upon himself and resolved to do anything for Al's sake. Not only was it those feelings of Subaru, but moreover his unparalleled resolve to save everyone even if it means dying. Al had betrayed all of it. If he had killed Subaru and Beatrice, then even if Petra tore apart Al's body, mind, and soul, she would be unable to fulfill her revenge. Meili, Petra-chan, Oniai-san and Beatrice-chan Ari. Petra, they are alive. Absolutely, Meili, yeh. Both of them, especially Oniai-san, are really tenacious, Meili said quietly and gently rested her head on Petra's shoulder. Even Meili, who was never so straightforward with her feelings, was genuinely concerned for Subaru and Beatrice. The fact that those around her felt the same way was a testament to Subaru's achievements thus far. Subaru, whether it comes to Beatrice or Meili, what the hell did the me I don't know do? Even though they concerned himself, imaginary Subaru muttered in a bewildered tone regarding those unknown actions. Seeing imaginary Subaru's expression, Petra relaxed her lips into a smile and turned back to Clind. Petra had already conveyed her intentions and objectives. All that remained was to wait for his response. Facing Petra's gaze directly, Clind quietly let out a sigh from his thin lips. Clind, only you can do it, you say. What a bold statement. However, your resolve is a sight to behold. Admiration. Petra, Clind, frankly speaking, when the witch emerged at the end of the world, bringing about a situation that only the Sword Saint could possibly thwart, I had already half resigned myself to the fact that it was irreversible. Regret. However, if you are determined to fight on, then, Petra, hold on, Clind Niyasama. Clind had begun to speak, only to be met with Petra interrupting him mid-sentence. It was not because she was concerned that the conversation would have become lengthy or gone off on a tangent. To put it in Clind's words, it was an unease that she could not clearly articulate. However, it was precisely because he regretted overlooking that previous unease that Petra could not overlook this one. What caught Petra's attention was the way Clind said it. Petra, I said we. That includes you, Clind Niyasama. Don't talk as if you're not one of us, Clind, that is. Hesitation. Petra, even if this might not be the right time, I will say it. Clind Niyasama, You've always acted like you're an outsider when you're with us. I don't like that. If he was dealing with Petra and the rest of the Emilia camp as adults, as people in positions where it was necessary to take a step back, then she could still understand it. But Clind was different. He treated everyone the same. Arnrose, whom Clind adored most, Roswell, who had a relationship like partners in crime with Clind, Frederica, who could not bring herself to cut Clind out of her life, the same was true for all of them. Petra, that kind of lifestyle would never be tolerated in Emilia Nisama's ideal kingdom. Clind, Petra, this isn't someone else's problem. If you're alive, meeting people, talking to them, and spending time with them, then the good and bad things that happen are all part of it. You shouldn't just pick out only a few bits, or only the good parts, because you can't cheat like that. Meili, Petra-chan, Petra, if you keep doing that, eventually everyone important to you will turn their backs on you. Having felt Meili's presence brush against her sleeve, Petra spoke with such force that she was out of breath. Halfway through, she was no longer able to tell if she was expressing herself clearly, or if her message had gotten through at all. She had surely been influenced by the Subaru from the Book of the Dead. Subaru, oi, aren't I part of cheating like you were just talking about? Imaginary Subaru spoke thus with a frown, but she consciously ignored him for now. What was more important was Clind's reaction. Clind, everyone important to me turning their back on me, is it? Keen realization. At Clind's muttered remark, Petra gasped softly. This was partly because the horribly poignant emotions contained within Clind's low voice resonated tragically deep within her heart. But more than that, it was Clind's expression that caused her to feel this way. Petra, Clind rarely showed his emotions on his face. Petra could not think of any instances where he smiled, became angry, or appeared sad. Clind simply conveyed everything with a blank expression. There was a change in Clind's expression. One of deep sorrow, a poignant voice and a sorrowful expression. When both overlapped, one could describe it as ephemeral. At that moment, Clind had an ephemeral and painful expression, as if reminiscing about the past. Clind, that has already happened. Nostalgia. Petra, Clind near Sama. Clind, I have already had everyone turn away from me before. Petra. Self-deprecation. When she heard those words, Petra felt ashamed, remembering what she had said just before. With arrogance, she spoke grandly about feelings he had only just begun to grasp, as if she knew everything. Clind already knew those feelings, and yet he acted the way he did. However, despite feeling ashamed, Petra still wanted to say something. Petra, even so. Clind, yes, even so. Admiration. Petra, huh? Clind, once before, I relinquished everything. Even though it is true that I was left empty by that, there were things I gained and accumulated along the path I walked afterwards. Reflection. Petra, my relationship with you and everyone else has been one of those things. Revelation. After he said that, Clind closed his eyes and gazed into the sky. What did he see in that sky, where scattered clouds were being torn apart, as if barely holding back the end of the world on the other side? Clind, why did I stay here, even though I was not ordered to, just because of some slight feeling of unease? I suppose it was because I, too, found it unbearable to let things continue like this. Unclouded mind. Petra, Clind-san, would that mean? Meili, that would mean it is like Petra-chan said, and you are apologizing? Petra, Meili-chan, Subaru, whoa, Meili Paisen said it, confusing Petra. Meili's clear response brought surprise. Next to Petra, who was staring wide-eyed, Subaru called Meili Paisen in an admiring tone of voice, and even though she had no memory of him doing that, she thought it was a typical reaction for Subaru. Unconcerned by Petra's confusion, Clind let out a small laugh. Clind, forgive me for causing you anxiety due to my lack of awareness. Sincerest apologies. That said, Petra, I am deeply appreciative of you. Debt of gratitude. I, too, would like to contribute positively. Petra, Clind near Sama. Declaring thus, Clind bowed respectfully, to which Petra's eyes lit up. However, as if to dampen Petra's excitement, Meili interjected with Meili, I don't think Butler-san had any intention of standing in our way or refusing to help. Re-GHT? Petra-chan, aren't you just overthinking TNGS? Petra, That may be true, but, Clind, no, that is incorrect, Mirila. Rectification. Perceiving a situation as one's own means that I will also take initiative in proposing plans toward the solution. A great difference from an onlooking bystander. Different people, Subaru, that's a bit of an exaggeration to say it's different people, Petra, but, we can expect that much, right? Then. Clind near Sama, use your mysterious power and take us to where everyone is. Eagerly leaning forward, Petra was determined to make full use of Clind's power. In fact, what Petra was counting on most in this situation was Clind's ability to teleport. His teleportation, which instantly removed the distance that separated them from their destination, was an indispensable power for chasing after Al, who was headed somewhere with the divine dragon in tow. Al's destination was unknown, but the very conspicuous divine dragon accompanied him. With the cooperation of Mirila, Ram and the others, and even the odious Roswell, it should be sufficiently possible to determine their destination and catch up with them, so proclaimed Petra's enthusiasm as she exhaled a rough breath from her nose. But, Clind, unfortunately, my teleportation is not something that can be utilized without restriction. Rather, in terms of restrictions, it is a fairly inversatile power. Regrettable, Petra, Clind near Sama, you liar. You traitor, Subaru, that's no fair after getting our hopes up. Clind near Sama, you killjoy, Mirila, P. Petra-chan, you're being too ha-rsh. I don't think Butler-san meant any ha-rm. The glimmer of hope abruptly extinguished, and Petra seethed with the imaginary Subaru in tow. Only half of their anger reached Clind and Mirila, but him being a killjoy was the truth. In the first place, it was a power of unknown mechanism, but when it got established that they couldn't use the teleport which they had been counting on, the conversation just came down to a handsome man proactively accompanying them. Clind, it is not precisely teleportation, but the compression of space and time. Elucidation. It compresses the distance one would originally have to travel and the time originally requisite for it. However, in order to avoid it having a substantial effect on the world's way, it requires Odlogna's oversight. Expedience, Subaru, Odlogna? The hell's that supposed to mean? Petra, the root of mana and such, and according to Subaru's knowledge, something like a god with no consciousness. Probably, Clind uttered a word that struck them like a sucker punch, as Petra explained it to the imaginary Subaru whilst he tilted his head in confusion, and she herself was not entirely sure she understood either. While studying magic under Roswell, Petra had received a general explanation of Odlogna, but she was not sure if she understood it properly. Even Roswell had said it would be hard for him to claim that he fully understood Odlogna. However, Odlogna was an incredibly large concentration of power, and in a sense, it was said to be something that rested in a special place even from the pinnacles of powerful beings like the Sword Saint, the Divine Dragon, and the Witch of Envy. Mirila, so, what happens if you can't fool this Odlogna? Clind, that is unknown. The fact that it is unknown is terrifying. Shudder. In response to Mirala's question, Clind slowly shook his head. His answer did not seem deceptive or evasive. In other words, despite seeming to know everything, Clind shared Roswell's perspective. But, if that was the case, Petra, Clind near Sama, haven't you done it several times before? That means you were able to deceive Odlogna. What should we do? Clind, Petra, you were able to use your power because there was a method to it. What do you need, Clind near Sama? For example, mana is needed to use magic. A contract is necessary to control spirits. So, do you need to compensate Odlogna in order to use it? Clind. You are truly such a surprising child. Admiration. Clind's reaction served to confirm Petra's suspicions. In other words, by offering compensation to Odlogna, they could obtain permission to use Clind's extraordinary power. Or, as Clind himself put it, to turn a blind eye. Subaru, so like bribes and kickbacks, what a corrupt materialist, despite being a god. The sour-faced imaginary Subaru's remark was something Petra wholeheartedly agreed with. But on the other hand, she felt that a god who demanded something in return was more trustworthy than a god who gave freely without asking for anything in return. Most importantly, Petra knew all too well that the world was not set on easy mode where one could just get what they wanted without making any sacrifices. That was why, Petra, please tell me what you need, Clind near Sama. I will arrange for it without fail, no matter what it is. For Subaru, Beatrice-chan, and everyone else, Meili, OH, Petra-chan, you're being silly. You just said it yourself, but it's not I, it's we, Petra. Sorry. But, thank you. Meili directed a minuscule smile at Petra and held her arm, who had resolved her determination. Looking back, she never imagined that she would have this kind of a relationship with Meili. When Meili was imprisoned in the mansion, Petra often visited her because she wanted to move her through compassion and keep her from becoming dangerous. Petra never imagined that she would nestle close to her at her moment of solitary decision. Clind, it is possibility. Response. Following a pause, Clind stated so before Petra and Meili, nothing so pessimistic as irresolution or incertitude, nor the hesitation or woe to apprise such youthful children of this. Clind accepted the present circumstance as his own, and deemed Petra and Meili to be certain allies faced before the same problem. Henceforth, he resumed, Clind, it is possibility, the influence to be exerted upon the world, upon Odlogna, that shall be forfeit as compensation. That is the condition for the utilization of the authority belonging to the witch factor of Tristitia in my possession. Divulgence.